Hey everybody, I see Joe. Hey Joe, how's it going today? Hopefully you're having a fantastic Easter. So I have Polly with me and we're actually getting ready to jump on IBN and do a show. We're starting the Infinite 80s today. It may trickle over till next week and the week after, but it's all fun and games. And if you guys like this content, give me a comment. Let me know because this is totally a test stream. I have no idea if it's even going to work or if anybody's going to even care. But please give me your feedback. So at the end of this, during, before, hit those comments. Let me know so me and Polly can keep going or not. We depend on your feedback. So, Polly, whenever you're ready, I am on standby. See, this is a test. I hear you clicking away over there, Polly. Is it? I got nothing coming from my headphones. How's Emma, Joe? Oh, that's right. You guys can't hear us because we're muted. Because you can't hear the songs we're playing. I would totally get a copyright strike if you guys heard this. But like I'm saying, this is a test. This is mostly just going to be us yarning and chatting because we can't actually play music here on YouTube. But I know Polly has been working diligent on getting some facts together for us. I'm going to be schooled a little bit with the 80s. Yeah, and I think if this works all well after each episode that we do, I'm going to leave a playlist here on YouTube. So if it helps you guys, you can pull up the playlist and you can hear us yarn. And when we cut to the music, you guys will actually know what we're listening to. And we'll just, like I'm saying, this is a test. We're going to give it a go. And whatever the music gods bestow on us is how we'll go. And if you guys want to hear
what's going on, everybody,
in real
happy Sunday
time,
and welcome to the first installment of the 80s series that me and my with 1980. So that's why you didn't hear the usual intro. Oh yeah, this is Polynation, and you're listening to the Independent Broadcast Network, and we call that IBN for short. In the greenhouse, we call it IBN. Join us in the greenhouse. We're going to be talking 80s for the next 2 hours. We got some tunes lined up, and I'm just bringing my co-host for this. Jules, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, my friend. How are you?
I'm well this Easter Sunday.
That's awesome. Good to hear you're doing fantastic.
So I hope you don't mind, Jules, but I came up with so you're going to be the 80s oracle for Polynation, and I hope that's okay. It's supposed to be an honor.
That's totally okay. I'm actually quite humbled.
Because, yeah, you're knowledge.
My nerdiness gets exposed, and I love it.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, let's just dive right into this then.
Yeah.
So 1980, the turn of a decade. That usually, I don't know what it is about the first year of any decade, but there's usually some pretty significant things going on in regards to media and, you know, how it's presented to people. Um, to me, it almost seems like the 80s was a time where they really started to blur the gender issues. And like, okay, let me preface this too as well. In 1980, I was 3 years old. So I don't remember a lot, but I do remember a lot of the mid 80s. Um, so here's so first of all, does anybody even know who the president of the United States was in 1980? You can chuck it in the chat room if you know. I'll bet you Jules knows.
Actually, no, Jules does not know, but if I had to guess, I would guess Carter.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's Carter.
I,
But
I like
I
yourself. I'm not that much older than you. In 1980, I was 7. I didn't know much about world
right.
politics or what's going on at 7.
So
All my
hey, everybody's got to cut us some slack then.
Yeah, my at 7 years old, my mornings consist my joys consisted of the Love Boat, the Smurfs, and chewing gum. That's that, and strawberry shortcake. Holly Hobby was on her way out, and in came strawberry shortcake. That
Yeah, I
was
remember
summed
Big
up
League Chew.
1980, my year.
Okay, so you're right. Carter was the president, but I want to say that Reagan was elected that year too, but maybe not. Anyways, I should double fact check my stuff before. You got to cut me some slack because I'm Canadian. Why do I need to know about
Yeah,
American
I mean,
presidents?
it seems logical. 1980 was an even year. I mean, that would have been an election year, and that year, I believe Reagan was in 81. I could be wrong
W-
too, but
Well, guess who the Prime Minister of Canada was in 1980?
was it a Trudeau?
How did you guess? It was his dad. Yeah.
Just
How did you get?
I
That's
hear
weird, eh?
I hear things, and I have a knack for collecting things that aren't relevant at the time, but later on, I might just need to pull it out of my hat, and that's one of those moments.
Okay, let's get it. I got tons of little tidbits of what was going on in 1980, and then we'll get into some music and some woo.
Yeah,
Speaking
fantastic.
of music, apparently this made top news. January 16th of 1980, Paul McCartney was arrested at a Tokyo International Airport for possession of marijuana and was sent to jail for guess how many days? Rio knows this. 9.
I didn't know that.
That's kind of weird that he went to jail for 9 days. What else happened? Pink Floyd. They had an album that many are familiar with called The Wall. That hit #1 in 1980.
Yep.
The U.S. boycotted the Olympics in Moscow that year. What else we got? Okay, that's just in January. Like, I'm going month by month here. Oh, February 19th, some sad news. Lead singer of AC/DC, Bon Scott, passes away following a heavy night of drinking in London. So, yeah, that he was I think the best singer for AC/DC. I mean, I like Brian Johnson, but Bon Scott, something about him. He was like the Keith Moon of vocalists.
I
Did
would
you ever get
agree.
into AC/DC, Jules?
In my younger days, no, but don't laugh. I'm a late bloomer. I'm just now getting into ACDC.
Okay.
Uh, they lately in the past couple of weeks, I've got my routine. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. I mean, the first thing that I do is like pick a random, like not super hardcore metal song, but not something super soft either, something in the middle. And I'll usually like pick something like Guns N' Roses, and it'll build a playlist around the song. And all these ACDC songs are coming on, so they're inspiring me to go back and listen to more of their stuff. So I've got some ACDC lined up for tomorrow's workout.
Right on. Yeah, they're good workout music for sure. Um, we any sports fans out there, you may remember this hockey game in the Olympics called the Miracle on Ice, where the U.S. hockey team beats the heavily favored Soviet Union 4-3 at Lake Placid in one of the biggest upsets in Olympic history. America goes on to win gold. Good
Yep,
for you guys.
I wasn't there. I don't
Yeah,
remember it, but
I kind of remember they had hockey cards celebrating that win. There's documentaries. In March of that year, the existence of Janus, which is a moon of Saturn, is confirmed by the Voyager 1 probe. I don't know what the whole significance of Janus is as far as mythology and stuff goes, but there you have it. Saturn has like a ton of moons. What else? Yep. Pierre Trudeau, sworn as the 17th Prime Minister of Canada for the second time. That's worded incorrectly. How can you be the 17th Prime Minister twice? Anyways, what else happened there? There was a lot of.
there are some good movies that came out in 19...
What were some? Okay, let me ask you this, Jewel. Are you there?
I am. There's I'm hearing you, but I've got a lag on the music part. I mean, again, everybody, this is just a test, and looks like I'm about 30 seconds behind headset wise.
Yeah, we're flying by the seat of our
Pants. I seem to have technical difficulty. Paulie cut out on me. I'm not sure if he can hear me or if he's manning the
Yeah,
DJ
I can
station.
hear you.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll just keep
Yeah,
going.
I can hear you. Yeah.
When you're gonna cut the music, let me know.
Yeah, well, I can't just cut to any music. It has to be from 1980 and only 1980. That's the rules. That's the rules for the next 2 hours.
All right, so we were speaking of movies from 1980, and there are a lot of the songs, again, because I was so young, a lot of the songs that when I hear from 1980, they were released in late 79, so they trickled into 1980 and they become blockbuster movies and blockbuster hits in the 80s.
Yeah, and I want to say like the 80s was when they really started using soundtracks to market movies, or movies to market soundtracks, whatever order you want to put that in. There was like a sort of an increase in that,
I believe it
at
was
least in my
both.
opinion.
That one of the biggest like soundtracks that probably started all of that was probably in 1984 is a year that comes to mind for that, because in 1984 you had the popularity of Ghostbusters. That had a huge soundtrack, not to mention Footloose. That had a big soundtrack. And then you went in Purple Rain with Prince. That was a huge soundtrack. So they kind of go hand in hand. The popularity of the artist with the movie, it was a way to cross revenue from both streams.
And then you had movies like The Wall, which were like a triple threat. They had the album, which was a double album, and a concept album. So then that was the soundtrack to the movie, and then they actually, like, the movie was about it like basically just a visual representation of the story that the album was telling. So it was even more tied into uh, the music. But I don't know what came first with The Wall. Was it the movie, or was it the story, or was it the music?
I'm actually not sure on that either. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I remember hearing the music before I ever saw the movie.
Oh really?
I mean, but then again, I was like 7. I remember hearing Another Brick in the Wall on the radio.
Yeah,
I
there
mean,
was
I
a few.
was 7. I was 7. My family no way was going to let me watch a movie
Right. Yeah. See,
called
my
The
parents were
Wall.
the
My
opposite.
parents wouldn't take me.
My parents threw me in front of every movie they could get their hands on. Yeah. In the greenhouse, Rio just mentioned Airplane and The Shining, both
Yes,
really,
both
really huge,
both
influential
were big,
movies.
huge movies in the 80s. And there's another one that's on a suggested playlist I sent you.
Oh, right. Okay. You know what? We should. Okay. Let's. I want to play at least this one song. This is because Canadian, and I'm Canada. Uh, there's a band that I bet you a lot of you haven't heard of because I think they only had one hit, and they were called Martha and the Muffins, I think. Give me 2 seconds. I had this one lined up and I
Yeah,
don't know where it
I'm
went.
like keen to hear this because I have actually never even heard of this myself.
Stand by. Okay. So yeah, it's Martha and the Muffins, and this was a band from Toronto in 1980, and I believe this is the only song that ever made anything for them. So here it is, uh, Echo Beach by Martha and the Muffins. This is Polynation. You're listening to IBN, otherwise known as the Independent Broadcast Network, and we'll see you in a bit.
Super cool. So, hey Ron, good to see you in chat. Good to see you, Joe. Hope the Easter Bunny was nice to everybody today. It's been a quiet and peaceful day here.
I seem to be having some technical difficulties now. Why is it doing that? I don't get it.
Probably because you're in close proximity of me, the one who always has technical difficulty.
It's oh, I know why. Haha, it's not technical difficulties, folks. It's another thing which is almost as common. It's called user error. And because I forgot about this thing called a volume slider, uh yeah, it was muted. So here we go again. Let's try it this time. There it goes.
I'm still with you. I'm not hearing anything through the headphones. I'm still here. Maybe that was a technical glitch. Can I blame it on the house gnomes? Are they messing with my electronical gear? They make a good scapegoat, but really, I'm just technically challenged. I can't blame it on the cats today. They're both napping peacefully, looking at me like, you stupid fool, what are you trying to do? So, how's everything working out so far? I've got to ask, even though there's just two of my favorite people here, Ron and Joe. I'm depending on your feedback. Is everything coming through? Can you guys hear me? Can you hear Polly? If you're listening to IBN, can you hear what's playing over there? Because I don't even know if Polly can hear me. Ah, thanks, Joe. I mean, again, I have like at least a 30-second lag. And Ron, I'll drop you the link. I have to close a window or so and drop it. And I think what I'm gonna do since is create a playlist, and after every kind of episode we do here, I'll have a playlist so you can have reference of music that we're talking about if you guys can't hear it from IBM. It'll at least have something to tie it back to and vice versa. Yeah, I hear Polly typing every now and then. I don't hear anything coming from the network, but I do hear him. So trial and error. Eventually we'll get it. I would insert some music, the Yaki Sax theme from, but again, copyright. Well, it's Easter. Enjoy the day. You know, a lot of people like Easter because it's springtime, nice lush grass outside. That was a subtle tie-in. If you got them, you know what to do with them. Polly, are you hanging in there, finding what you need? I don't know if you can hear me, Polly, but Polly says when he hears you when you talk, but no music. Which kind of Ron. I mean, Ron, that's kind of what we were going for. We were trying to figure out a way how to yarn and not have music playing. So it's working, but it's kind of working too good right now. Wow, Joe still has snow. Ironically, it's been the past couple of days have been cold for us. I mean, it warmed up and then it just stayed cold, and it was supposed to warm up today, but it hadn't. But we had bad storms roll through. So I wasn't. It kind of kept me offline for a day or so because I had to have my computer turned off. Not much coming up this week except power is going to be interrupted with utility companies installing some new lines.
It's the Independent Broadcast Network. You're listening to Poly Nation. I'm Polly. I'm here with my good friend Jules. And we are
Hello.
talking 1980.
Yeah.
And yeah, how big was Michael Jackson in 1980? I mean, come on. He was like the
Michael Jackson
first,
was
like,
he
or the
was
second
just
Elvis, I should say.
he was on the cusp of just getting big. 1980, Michael Jackson had his Off the Wall album, which had three or four hits.
Yeah. And speaking of musicians that are no longer with us, John Lennon was also shot in 1980 as well.
Yes, he was.
I thought about playing a song by John Lennon's 80s stuff, but I think I'm going to save that for a whole other show of just do all what the Beatles were doing after the Beatles, a whole show on that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I look forward to that show.
Another thing that actually happened, which I actually remember, believe it or not, even though I was only 3 years old, I vividly remember the TV showing me Mount St. Helens blowing up.
I don't remember that. I was too young.
Yeah, I don't think it killed a lot of people, but it was a display of Mother Earth's fury and power. And yeah, the whole side of the mountain just blew off. I don't think there's video footage of it, but what there is there's like what I would say pseudo time lapse where someone managed to shoot off like 10 frames in a minute or something like that, and it's pretty insane. The whole side of the mountain just exploded. Another cool thing you guys might not know, because we all love CNN, right? We all love CNN. They're so reliable. They started in 1980. What else started that's just as good as CNN? Oh, Whole Foods. Whole Foods, those guys that charge 3 times the price for food you can grow yourself.
You mean
Yeah,
those guys?
yeah, those guys. They started in 1980. Thanks, Austin, Texas. That's one bad thing that came out of Austin that I can think of. The term cyberpunk was coined in 1980, and I didn't know that. I thought that was a much newer term.
Likewise.
And here's another one that you guys might be kicking yourself as US. Okay. In 1980, Detroit gave the keys to the city to somebody named Saddam Hussein. That's weird. Why? Oh, there was also a $1.5 billion bailout that Carter basically signed through to bail out Chrysler that year as well. And Saddam Hussein was given the keys to Detroit that same year. Wonder why.
Detroit, the Motor City.
Yeah. Isn't that weird?
Yep.
Like they say, though, hindsight's always 20/20, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, another Canadian tidbit. In 1980, there was a man named Terry Fox who ended up getting some kind of a bone cancer, I believe it was. And he was an amputee. And he decided to start at the East Coast. I think it was in Nova Scotia or something like that. He dipped his prosthetic leg in the Atlantic Ocean. And then he tried to run across the country like Forrest Gump. To raise money and awareness for cancer. He made it as far as Thunder Bay. This dude ran on one prosthetic leg and one real leg. He ran from Nova Scotia to Thunder Bay. If you look at a map and see how far that is, that's like insane.
I wonder, speaking of soundtracks, I mean, Forrest Gump didn't come out until like 1990, 92?
Right.
93. It was around that time frame, and the soundtrack to that it had a lot of music with it. The soundtrack actually had 2 different CDs with it.
Well, see, there's the part in that movie where he just like his mom dies or whatever, and he just decides to keep running, and he runs back and forth across the country. And I'm pretty sure that that was inspired by the Terry Fox story, and that's why they put it in the movie. At least that's what it made me think of. I don't know
Yeah, because
if
that's
that's
that's what I'm thinking of too.
like I'm not even sure if Terry Fox is even well known outside of Canada because he's a Canadian icon. I think he's on our money too. Like there's quarters or something that. Anywho,
Yeah,
um, so okay, let's talk about food because I have a soft spot in my heart for food, as you will all find out later on down the line. The first thing I think of when I think of 80s food is cereal, and the second thing I think of is candy. So if that's not a red flag for 80s food, then I don't know what is. So what are some of the what were some of your favorite foods in 1980?
in 1980, I still two things that if I could time travel and go back, I would go to the first store because I'm sure when you travel through space time, you might get the munchies or you might be hungry. In theory, I would go for the old school carnation breakfast bars. Those bars that look like actual candy bars that had all your basic grains, oatmeal, and everything slathered with a layer of chocolate on top of it. Totally,
Yeah,
totally not breakfast at all. And
no, it's
another,
totally just prerequisites for diabetes.
yep. And another thing that I would go back and I would buy gobs and gobs and gobs of because 1980 was what, 42, 43 years ago. I still can smell and I can taste the strawberry shortcake flavored bubble gum. That was a tie-in when strawberry shortcake was just getting to the height of the toys popularity. It
Oh,
was
I
one of
remember
those.
those.
Yeah,
Those
it
were
was.
those dolls. They had this like chemical sprayed on their hair so that they always smelled like some kind of food.
Yeah, there's strawberry shortcake. There was Huckleberry Finn. There was apple dumpling. There was apricot, cherry blossom. They all had that foodish smell.
Yeah, looking back on that, I'm thinking maybe that stuff wasn't that good for me to inhale. I don't know. But okay, I feel like the 80s was like when cereal, they just started jacking it full of sugar. Just like literally making it mostly sugar. It's 80% sugar and a bit of texture, and you pour milk over it so your kid gets calcium.
Yeah, like in the early 80s, that's when cereal was for me when it was actual cereal, like 78, 79, 80, 81, especially Fruity Pebbles. Fruity Pebbles before the mid 80s were the height of their flavorness, their good flavor. It's before they changed the recipe and put all the high fructose corn syrup and stuff in it. Just Fruity Pebbles, and it would all that was. And I didn't even drink milk when I was a kid, but I like Fruity Pebbles. Fruity Pebbles and Apple Jacks are two cereals from the 80s, especially 1980, that do not taste the same today.
True. Hey, do you remember the A Team? So
I do.
Mr. T had a cereal, and I can't remember what it was called, but I remember that it was just Captain Crunch with Mr. T's face on the box.
Yeah, it was just called Mr. T. It was a yellow box and it had the red T on it.
And
And
I was like, he pitied the fool that doesn't eat his cereal, but I pitied him for not coming up with an original cereal.
and most people actually have forgotten about Mr. T cereal. And then along come 1985, you have this Tim Burton made his debut film in 1985 with a movie called Pee Wee's Big Adventure.
Oh yeah.
And Tim Burton back in the early 80s was actually employed with Disney Studios. He was an artist. He was a creator for Disney animation and animated films.
You could do a whole show on Tim Burton, probably.
And Tim Burton came along with Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and in the opening scene, the whole Rube Goldman gold contraption and everything, that was big in '85 because it was in the Goonies too. But you
Yeah,
had the breakfast machine, and he sat down at the table and had Mr. T's cereal.
yeah. Actually, King just dropped a perfect gift for that in the greenhouse. How's
Oh,
it going, everybody in the greenhouse?
I'm not in the greenhouse, but next time.
I know it's too much multitasking, isn't it?
And I actually wasn't even sure if this was going to work. So again, everybody, thank you for joining us, and hello
I,
to everybody over there in the greenhouse.
I think it's working. I think it's working. Someone would have said something by now if it's not working. Yeah. So I think it's working. I think maybe your connection maybe like cut in and out a while ago, but it seems to be okay now.
Because I can hear you loud and clear over here on my end.
Yeah, I'm paranoid. My mic is always too loud. That's what I'm paranoid of. So okay, let's get into some more music now. I'm gonna play. You know what? I'm just gonna take a stab. I mean, all the songs on the list I have in front of me right now are just, they all take me back to when I was 3. Doesn't that sound weird? Like, I hope
No,
I don't sound like arrogant saying that, like, I remember stuff that, like, when I was 3. And, like, there's people way older than me listening to this being like, you don't remember that.
no,
Anyways,
take you back. I remember my oldest memory is when I turned 2 years old. So you're not crazy.
yeah,
We're not.
okay. Maybe some people are just better at it than others. I don't know. So,
And
okay, here's a band that we haven't talked about yet, and I'm gonna play probably about a couple songs after this as well that I had in mind. And actually, I did get your message over Skype, and I'll look for one of those as well. But don't tell; it's a
no,
surprise.
it's a
Get into
surprise.
some more music. You guys are listening to Polynation on the Independent Broadcast Network, otherwise known as IBN. If you feel like coming on over into the greenhouse, we got the perfect humidity, we got the perfect amount of sun, and we got the perfect amount of water. And if you're going to smoke, just open the window. Here's The Police from 1980. Oh, wait a minute. Here's The Police from 19.
I don't know if you can hear me, Polly, but I got no music coming in on this end on this YouTube stream. I might have actually lost my feed. And that's exactly what happened. I have lost my feed. Sorry for the stillness, anybody that's listening live on this go round. This is a test. Repeat, this is a test. of Jules trying to be technical. Thanks for hanging with me, Ron. I appreciate you being here with us. Yeah, I guess I shouldn't have spent so much time this morning working on my nerd project, and I should have
This is awesome.
been nerdy in other areas. Hey, Joe, thanks for being here too. It's always good to have you guys with me. No idea what Polly's playing, but I'm pretty sure it's stellar. Yeah, I gotta. This is an interesting test stream. Yo, Polly! Hey, I think that movie might have come out around 1980. This is embarrassing. This is embarrassing. Been on live 42 minutes and I still haven't figured this out. Now would be a perfect time for YouTube to enable GIFs in the comments because I've got several of them that come to mind that seem appropriate for this moment in time. That sounds tasty. Whatever. As long, I just hope we're not cracking open a can of Tab because that stuff was awful in the 80s. They tried to bring it back in the 90s and in the aught years, and they finally killed it a few years ago. Nobody likes Tab anymore. It was the only beverage I ever remember having a pink can. Yeah, so I hear I hear nothing. My feed on IBM has died, and I can't figure out using a phone how to actually work with it. So yeah, my apologies, everybody. I came very unprepared, but I kind of didn't know what I was preparing for either. So it is what it is. I came here to chill, have some Sunday vibes with my peeps, and have some fun. So my mission is accomplished. I only apologize for my lack of unprofessionalism. And I don't even know if Polly can hear a word I'm saying. So it's just the three of us here, Ron and Joe. Should I kill this stream or just let it play out? I can't type today. I hear you, Joe. I'm toying with like just doing an hour here and then just 86ing my stuff and then just coming on over to the greenhouse. I mean, everything that I had wanted to master on my end, I'm actually able to. But it's working exceptionally well for me on my end. But the lag with IBN and everything, it's definitely different. So, Polly, can you hear me? Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to end up doing is reaching a happy medium, going an hour here, jumping over to the greenhouse. So you guys only have like 10 more minutes to bear with me babbling like an idiot because I'm so boring. I have nothing to bring to the table. All I did last week was work and take care of personal commitments, and that's it. I'm boring. Yeah. So let me message Polly. Sorry again. Sorry for all the lag and everything. This was a test, and I'm still trying to determine how successful it was. I think it's as simple as an invite via Skype or something to join everybody in the greenhouse. But we shall see.
This is Poly Nation on the Independent Broadcast Network. You're listening to Elvis Costello. Can't stand up for falling down. Elvis Costello is probably one of the most underrated people from the 80s, and I guess he was around in the late 70s as well. Very underrated. Kind of like a almost like a lesser version of a Prince. It seemed like all the musicians seemed to respect this guy more than the people buying his records. That's just my opinion. So yeah, we're back. I got some other cool tidbits here from 1980. Here's a good one because I remember this one. I think I still have one somewhere. The Rubik's Cube came out in the 80s. Was debuted in a toy exhibition in London. And everybody knows the Rubik's Cube. And there's people now that can do this thing blindfolded in seconds. They just take one look at it. It can be completely random. You can mix it up as much as you want. They take one look at it, solve it blindfolded in 30 seconds. I don't know if anybody has ever used a Rubik's Cube, but yeah, that's pretty impressive. You can visualize that and then keep it in your head while you're making all those moves and do it in less than a minute.
I never mastered the Rubik's Cube. I remember when the Rubik's Cube Smasher came out.
Yeah, so you could just break it apart and put it back together.
Do you know how I solved the Rubik's Cube?
You peel the stickers off.
Yep.
Yeah. That's what I did too. I could never get more than one side. Yeah. I could never get more than one side. You know, a much simpler toy at the time. I don't know if it came out in the 80s, but I had one. It was a Slinky. And you just throw that thing down the stairs, and that was all you need to do. That's the whole toy. Throw it down the stairs. That's it.
You know, I must have watched a lot of TV in my super younger years because I still remember some of those old commercial songs.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Here's another thing that's cool about TV. In the 1980, apparently the television stations were hacked, in quotations, and we were introduced to a person or a personality named Max Headroom. Remember him?
Yep. 1985-ish.
Right? Kind of like maybe another attempt at a deep fake or something, almost. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that
how do you hack into a TV?
They
made it look real.
Yeah, they did. They used him heavily to tie into Coke.
Yeah, and I think he was also endorsed by McDonald's at one point. Even maybe I could be remembering that wrong. Also,
there was a song that he did. I think it was The Art of Noise.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I got to look for that now. Also in 1980, a famous video game came out called Pac-Man. And cool piece of trivia here. The original name for Pac-Man was Puck-Man because he looks like a puck, right? But
yeah.
some clever or lack thereof vandals would erase the curvy part of the P in such a way that it now looks like an F. And so people would, you'd find like 5-year-old kids playing Fuck Man, and they didn't like that. So they changed the name to Pac-Man because you can't change an A into a U.
True.
And I believe Pac-Man had its own cereal.
It might have. I remember for some reason, it's like the 1982-83 is when I think cereal started to be really big tie-ins. Because I know.
Okay. What was the name of that Max Headroom song?
Oh, I can't remember the name. Paranoia?
Okay, yep, got it.
Featuring Art of Noise or something like that?
Yep. Oh, I got it. It's queued up. Okay, that's sweet. This is what I was hoping would happen, is we would just randomly think of songs to play uh, in this show because it's super fun going back to the 80s. I hope everybody else is having as much fun as I am in the
Um,
greenhouse, listening online, wherever you are. And we're not even halfway through the show yet. We still got tons to go. So I can cross Pac-Man off the list. Oh, hey, here's something. Shame on me being Canadian and not have already mentioned this. It was in 1980 that Canada officially adopted the national anthem that we have now, and it's called "O Canada." And that other than that, I really don't feel like talking about our national anthem because I don't think they have a purpose, really. But that's when ours was officially recognized,
wow.
1980. Yeah, I know. You'd think that Canada would have had a national anthem a lot longer. Like,
You know what? The irony with that is Pierre Trudeau was your prime minister, and then the dealings going on over in Canada today with his son is completely different.
yeah. Well, there's tons of stories around his son uh, that he may not even be his son. Those kind of like he's Fidel Castro's illegitimate son or what. I don't know if I believe all that, but it's there. What else happened in 1980? We have the World Health Organization announces that smallpox has been eradicated. Well done. They did it, even though didn't we have a smallpox outbreak like a couple years ago somewhere?
And I haven't done the research, I can't pinpoint the date, but 1980, I think McDonald's was doing their test run, their trial launch of chicken McNuggets. Because I remember having, because I was so young, why I'm so fond of music from 1980, 81, 82, 83 is my father was military and we traveled and we were stationed in Hawaii in the early 80s. So I literally find myself listening to 1980s music, the early 80s, just to actually pinpoint where I was living at that time. And in
So I see what you see.
19, yeah,
You use
1980,
80s songs as like time markers in your life.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, to know where I was, they have become time markers in my life. And I remember long before Hawaii was the test market for those so-called chicken McNuggets. And I had chicken nuggets years before they ever found their way as far east. At that time, we were living in Mississippi. So
Wow.
music, especially from the 80s, really, really is mile markers, age markers, memory markers for me.
Yeah, it's like it's the same power that like a smell has. When you smell something you haven't smelled for a long time, it just like zooms you right back to the age you were when you remember it. Like
Yeah.
songs do the same thing. It's kind of weird.
I mean, we were so young that television was like major impact on us. I mean, that's where there was so much nostalgia looking back just in the year 1980 for TV and music, TV and movies, and then music on top of that. Um, some of the shows that were big in 1980, the Dukes of Hazzard was just gaining popularity. So was Magnum PI. Then you had old classics. Laverne and Shirley were still running. I think the Love Boat was running in 1980. I don't think that was its debut season, but there were all
Yeah,
these old
it
Three's
was.
Company. Three's Company was running in 1980. All those classic sitcom songs that
MASH.
still, yeah, to this day, when as soon as they play, we know what they are.
Yeah. So I wonder, like, I feel like this is kind of the testing ground, like the earlier testing grounds for what they're really doing now. Like shows like that, where they could literally rein in millions of people because they wanted to see what's going to happen in the next episode. And then we had soap operas. I think the birth of a soap opera maybe came in the 80s. I could be wrong. It might be older,
Well,
but
the
I'm
birth
pretty
of the
sure.
soap operas were around long before 1980.
Oh, okay.
There's one of them, and I know this because I got my oil changed a couple of weeks ago, and I ended up watching a little bit of The Price is Right. And that show has changed dramatically over the years as well. It looks nothing like the version that we knew when we were kids. Um, yeah, so 1980, and I forgot where I was going with this. Oh well, maybe it'll come back. But in the meantime, Buzz does have a point. The Russians were big into psychic research in the 80s, and this is around the time when Yuri Bezmenov came out and told us it takes 3 generations to desensitize.
And that doesn't seem like a lot of time, really, when you think about it. When you've been alive longer for 3 generations. Like a generation is what, like 15 years? Like I don't even know how long is a generation? How many years is 10? 20?
Yeah, I'm not clear about that either.
Yeah, well, it is what it is then.
Yeah,
I
Buzz
I
said
mean,
that he
if you could
admitted
compare people that didn't remember things when they were, some people don't have memories beyond, 10 years old. And here we are talking about memories that are like 3, 4 years old. So maybe it's just not the same recollection ability.
perhaps. I mean, Buzz brings up a point. January 18th, the 7th American Music Awards. There were Barry Manilow, Donna Summer, the Bee Gees, Kenny Rogers with Barry Manilow, and Barry Manilow, the Bee Gees, Donna Summer. I mean, they were huge in the later part 70s and the 80s, especially Kenny Rogers. Kenny Rogers was massive crossover in 1980. He had several hits. He had several duets.
So also in 1980, the album Back in Black was released, and I mentioned Bon Scott earlier, the same band, AC/DC. Apparently, majority of the songs on Back in Black had already been written, and so Brian Johnson was given the bittersweet task of performing those lyrics that he didn't even like. Imagine what kind of position that puts you in, eh? Like, hey, we want you to sing these songs from our lead singer who died, and then we can just keep making records after that. Like, I don't know. I'd be like a little bit uncomfortable because he was a fan too, right? So,
Yeah.
like, you want me to sing for AC/DC and sing songs that aren't even mine, like, because the guy's dead. Like, I don't know if I'd be able to do that. But good on him. Brian Jones had a great career. He can't sing or talk or anything anymore because he's totally ripped apart his, what did you call it, vocal cords. Apparently, he can't even talk anymore. So he ruined his voice for the sake of rock and roll. It's a
No,
noble cause.
that's really taking one for the team.
Well, you would not find somebody taking one for the team in today's society, that's for sure. Because everybody now is just out for themselves, right? I mean, even if you don't have singing talent, you can just auto-tune it and you're good. People will still buy it as long as you follow the formula. And I think was the 80s was probably when they really started to push the formula. And by formula, I mean, this might be hard to explain for people who aren't musicians, but there's think of it this way. There's 8 possible chords. So there's only a finite number of possible combinations of those 8 chords. But what they've done is, especially in the 80s, they figured out you can take 2 or 3 chords and put them in almost any order as long as you follow this formula, and people will be drawn to these songs. And one of these days I'll do a show where I point out that the top 10 songs, like songs that are number one for longer than a couple of weeks, you put them all side by side, they're all basically the same 3 or 4 chords, just in a different order. And because they know it works, our brains react that way. And I feel like the 80s is when they really started trying to figure out how to do that, like on a more precise scale, like to sell specific things instead of just general ideologies, i.e., cereal, toys, and the like.
So I got an interesting thought question per se. Um, so the genre of music that you like most, for me, looking back on it, it was the Human League with the synth. Because now in my adult years, the past several years, I primarily am driven or gravitate to punk, classic new wave, classic alternative, those artists from that era that were on the verge of the synthesizer coming in. And Gary Newman was one of the first people to do that.
Yeah, Gary Newman is definitely another one of those artists from the 80s that I think is underrated, or maybe not underrated, but just lesser known. I'm sure if more people knew about him, they'd appreciate him. He was an innovator for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, and this isn't from 1980, but Foreigner Urgent. I found out this week that a young Thomas Dolby, who would go on to have a huge hit with synth and everything, he was the arranger for that album, specifically that song, Urgent, from
That's in,
Foreigner. Who would have guessed that Thomas Dolby would cut his teeth with Foreigner?
yeah, and Thomas Dolby is like, I mean, well, that's where Dolby comes from, right? So yeah, like that's
Here's a tie-in, 1980 tying in with Dolby. Dolby sound, surround sound, the whole THX, that logo. We were talking a couple of weeks, was it last week or the week before? We were talking about movies in the 80s and Spielberg. Steven Spielberg, one of his first movies was a movie called, I want to say THX or something like that, but the song that accompanied the movie was by Toto. The song 99 from Toto refers to number 99. This guy is in love with this lady called 99 because that Spielberg movie is tying in, it's got a vibe of 1984 where it's dystopian, and this guy falls for number 99. And THX was the name, or something similar to that was the name of the movie. When you mentioned Dolby sound, that's what came to mind.
well, okay. This is jogging my memory now because I always thought THX was George Lucas. Like he invented but I could be wrong because I might be just thinking of
No,
Skywalker Sound.
you could be right because I want to say that that's the first movie that Spielberg directed was a movie called THX or DHX.
I thought, see, yeah, I have the same sort of memory, but the director is George Lucas. Either way, speaking of George Lucas, one of his movies did come out in 1980, and it was Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that I remember going to see that in the movie theater, and I was only 3. How do you remember stuff when you're only 3? See, this is the thing. If I remembered a movie like that when I was 3, that must mean that they programmed that movie to be that memorable to somebody my age. They're doing that back in the 80s,
Subliminally, and I know
right?
it. Yeah.
Like there's somebody that said, I'm not sure if it was Bernays that said this or one of these German propagandists said something along the lines of, if you give me the mind of a toddler, I'll give you a subservient, like basically a slave that'll do whatever you want when he's an adult. Like, you won't believe anything other than what you've told him. And I think, the 80s was a kind of a testing ground for some of those things. Like, do you remember Twisted Sister?
Yes.
Okay, so before Twisted Sister, we had people like David Bowie, granted androgyny. Okay, it's androgyny. But Twisted Sister was an ugly dude literally trying to look like a woman. That's the first experience, at least for me in my life. Like, okay, you have androgyny, which is different because you can't really tell if it's male or female. But then you have Twisted Sister, and you can tell he's a dude, but you can also tell he's wearing girls' makeup. And to me, at 4 years old, what am I supposed to think about that? And what happened before that would make 4-year-olds think the same way? So this is what I'm thinking. The 80s was kind of like when they really started doing the testing grounds for some stuff.
Yeah, so curiosity got me, and I had to do a quick dive. The song 99 from Toto is about the dystopian stuff. It's from it's from a George Lucas film called THX
Yeah,
1938.
George Lucas. Yeah, that movie's. I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it so many times.
So there's just so much out there. I mean, and I don't know for everyone else, or you, Polly, or Joe, or Ron, or anybody in chat with us. It's not always music or movies. Sometimes it's smells bring me back to the 80s. Smell is definitely tied in. It's a whole sensory perception. You get the visuals,
Is
you get the
Drakkar
smell,
Noir one of them?
you get the smells. That's a later smell. That's a odd year smell. But taking it back smell wise, perfume for perfume in the 80s, Polo was big. Chaps from Ralph Lauren was big. I mean, women's perfume reeked in the 80s.
It did. It was like, okay, I think the 80s was when they invented that sort of perfume etiquette where they suggested that when you leave a room, the smell of you should leave with you. I thought that was a great way to do it. Like, yeah, if you can still smell you after you've been gone 20 minutes, you might be wearing too much perfume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you put on a bottle of perfume, is it safe to speculate that maybe you might want to shower at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's usually a sign of covering something up, right?
Yeah.
And you know what else was big in the 80s? And unfortunately, I'm not proud to admit it, but I got sucked in as a kid who wanted to look good to all the ladies. Hair gel. I would put this stuff in my hair and it would literally turn it rock solid. It's like wearing a helmet made of hair. And people
In the
thought that was normal in the 80s.
Yeah, well, in the early 80s, when the punk was in the late 70s, early 80s, punk, we used to put glue in our hair.
The white glue?
Yeah, white glue, Elmer's.
Yeah, yeah. That's hilarious.
I used to get I used to make colored glue when I way back when. I
Oh, did you
would
mix Kool-Aid with it or
I would
something?
do it. No, what I would do is the markers, the felt tip markers, you would take the cap off, and there would be like this sponge looking thing that had all the ink that the color for the marker was in. I would take that out and I would just stick it in a bottle of glue and just let the color seep through, would shake it up, and I would have colored glue.
Right on. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, and then Ron's in chat, and you did. We often colored our hair with Kool-Aid too.
Yeah, I did that once or twice. I remember I used to have dreadlocks and I colored my hair so many times. this wasn't in the 80s, but it reminded me of an 80s candy. When I cut my dreadlocks off, it looked like a gobstopper, like a cross section of a gobstopper. You remember gobstoppers?
Yes.
The candy from the 80s. Yeah, they're like jawbreakers, but smaller. Way easier to choke on. They don't
Yeah,
make candy like that now
no, they don't.
because one stupid kid choked to death on it and ruined it for everybody.
I remember in like 1980, Baskin Robbins came out with a bubblegum flavored candy. I mean, bubblegum flavored ice cream that literally had real pieces of bubblegum in it. It wasn't on the market long. Several people lost their
I was
teeth.
just gonna say, like, have you ever tried to chew bubble gum that's been frozen? Like, what are you, nuts? What do they call it? Literal rocky road? Because there's rocks in it. Watch your teeth. Okay, so as we were talking there, I lined up a couple more tunes that I think people might dig.
Cool.
Gonna play one
Yeah,
from Empire Strikes Back,
the last time you
and
played,
then
I was here before we during last spin session. I couldn't hear anything, which was perfectly cool for YouTube. You couldn't hear me. I couldn't hear. I could hear your background noise, but I was just hanging out with Joe and Ron and Buzz the last time we braked. So I was actually thinking.
okay, so it's not going perfect.
Well, no, I mean it's going good. It's going, and I'll get feedback from everybody. It's what I had wanted to do was not have music for copyright, and it's working like a champ over here on my end. The only concern that I have
Right, yeah, I didn't even think of that.
is that you can't hear me when you were spinning. You couldn't hear me.
Right. Well, when I'm spinning, it's because I mute you. Because
So
if I
I mean,
don't,
yeah.
then
So
everybody will. Yeah.
no. So what I'll do, I'll try muting you this time. So and then we'll go from there. I mean, after all,
Yeah, you should.
this is just a test stream, and Buzz and Ron and Joe, appreciate your patience with us. I'm not a professional, and nor do I claim to be.
Hey,
And
Jules, if
hello,
we were
everybody in the
professional,
greenhouse.
if we were professional, that would imply we were getting paid. This is a listener funded operation, so if anybody can throw some change in the jar, it's highly encouraged. I don't want any of that change. It's for the network. And if anybody here has never heard of Jules, go check out our YouTube channel, Bitter and Sweet. Yeah, she's got some good combos on there. So okay, I'm gonna get into some tunes. I want to play this song because Empire Strikes Back, and one of my favorite characters is Yoda, and this song is called Yoda's Theme. I'm not sure what it is. I know I've heard it before, and I know you probably all have heard it before too, but here it is. This is the Independent Broadcast Network. You're listening to Poly Nation. I'm Polly with my good friend Jules, and here we go. A little throwback to 1980, Star Wars.
Cool. So trying this again. I think I fixed the problem of Polly's background music. Hey, random thought. Does anybody want to jump on with me and kind of chill and talk with me and Polly about 80s? I'll drop a link. I'm just throwing that out there if anybody wants to join us. Yep. Polly's doing his thing, and I figured out how to take care of the clicky background. So maybe I'm going to hang here for a little bit longer and not just bail. Trial and error. But it's starting to bug me that I can't hear music. So I'm going to sit here and see if I can't cue it up on my phone or something so I can at least come back and have something to talk about. I appreciate you, Buzz. Groovy. I'm here to learn too. I want to learn from all you guys. I will gladly take a rain check, Buzz. You're welcome anytime. Hey, thinking of 1980, I was young, but memories come back. I remember Star Wars. I mean, the first one, the original, didn't that come out in like 77, and then the second one came out in 1980? Oh my god, Sesame Street. I totally remember Sesame Street. I was all about Grover. And call me crazy, but I still actually have my Grover doll that I've had since I was 2 years old. It's in my toy cupboard in my kitchen. Well, not in my kitchen, but in my dining room. I inherited plates and the traditional girly stuff when my grandmother passed away, and she willed me her hutch. And the first thing that I did when I moved in is I took all the plates and that kind of stuff out, and I moved in my toys. So when you walk through my front door, you take a sharp left, and the first thing you see is a hutch full of toys in front of the kitchen table. I've got all my relics there. I've got my strawberry shortcake collection. I've got Grover. I got my Cabbage Patch Kids. I've got some old wooden toy trains that I remember having those in the 70s. I must have been 3 or 4 at the time when I got those. And I got some ET stuff. I got some uh, obscure stuff that I don't know why I held on to it. I just did. I mean, and then ET bar soap from Avon back when Avon used to have like decal stickers on their soaps. Every now and then they would make soaps that would have decal stickers. I have an ET one, and you don't really notice it at first. When you hold it up, the whole actual bar of soap is shaped like a UFO. When we were talking about perfume a few minutes ago, Avon used to sell perfume. Back in the day, it was a niche for them because they used to have bottles that were specifically made for perfume. Like there was one that had the cat looking in the goldfish bowl. There was a dog that the top came off. And for the boys, they had like a gun. It was a perfume in a bottle that looked like a gun. And I remember it was Sweet Honesty is what it was called Avon's version of the girls' perfume, and I have no idea what they called the boys' perfume from Avon back in the 80s. Yeah, Old Spice and Brute. Old Spice isn't the same as it was back in the day. They kind of commercialized that and made a profit off of it and veered away, in my opinion, from the original smell. And that's awesome, Buzz. A $6 million man. That's awesome. Yeah, my favorite Muppet was Fozzie Bear. Waka waka waka. Mr. Snuffleupagus. He should have had more airtime, but I think they didn't bring him out a lot because he was a big puppet and it took a lot to man a puppet that size. I mean, there was Jim Henson who did Sesame Street and the Muppets. That was he was kind of like the tie-in. He was taken way before his time in the 80s with pneumonia. He died too soon, in my opinion. But looking at this perfume, I remember Love's Baby Soft was big in the early 80s. For fashion, it was Vidal Sassoon. I remember in the early 80s, Brooke Shields was getting ready to be popular, coming off the popularity of the Blue Lagoon. She was the spokesperson for Jordache jeans. But the fashion, women's fashion in the early 80s was not all like it's atrocious. I mean, we had this sack dress that literally looked like a giant sack that just somebody just cut holes in, made a few modifications, and tried to pass it off as a dress. And jeans, but it's interesting because jeans in the early 80s were like super dark denim. And then by the end of the 80s, denim had become acid washed. Oh, that's taking it back. Chanel number 5, my mother's favorite perfume till her dying day, and she wore it all the time in the late 70s, early 80s, was Charlie. I wonder if they even still make that perfume. So I can't remember any specific candy that debuted in the year 1980, but the 80s gave us 80s kids some good candy. Gave us whatchamacallit, Nerves, Jolly Rancher, Now and Later. Those were all popular 80s candies that stuck around. Oh, Twix was another chocolate that was given to us in the 80s. There was a lot of sugar going on in the 1980s. Uh, Clothing in the 80s, that's taking it back. Corduroy, Oshkosh B'gosh. But when I was like super young, around that age, I was a little bit too old for Granimals, but I rocked my Wonder Woman underoos. But corduroy still in fashion. If it with the right shirt or the right jacket, corduroy can stick around. I got no beef with corduroy, but polyester went out in the 70s. I mean, probably with good reason because I mean the material that's made of basically disintegrates. But leisure suits were going out of fashion in the early 80s. Yeah, hairstyles in 1980, I don't remember for women. I mean, I remember towards the mid 80s, towards the latter 80s, we were going to the whole feather look, but we still depended heavily on Aquanet. That's awesome, Spider Man. I remember we were living in Hawaii, so I must have been around 7 or so. And it was around the time Star Wars was getting popular again. One Halloween, dressed up as C3PO. And this is when you bought costume sets and they had the mask that had the little elastic cord on it. It's interesting seeing the progression of Halloween costumes, the commercialized ones. But thinking back to previous conversation of Baskin Robbins and ice cream and gum, gum was a pretty big commodity in the 80s. Industry it had its industry. That's when Big League Chew came about. The gum that you opened up like a pouch of chewing tobacco and you chewed it. Bubble Yum was big. Bubblicious was out there, and there were all kinds of flavors. As chocolate mint was one of them. Snap and apple was another one that I remember. Checker mint was another flavor of gum
This
from the
is
80s.
Poly Nation on the Independent Broadcast Network. I'm with my good friend Jules, and we are covering 1980, the first of a 10-part mini docu-series mentry, whatever you want to call it. We're going to do 1 year at a time, and we're going to do, well, some years might need 2 parts, and we're just going to fly by the seat of our pants. Hopefully at least once a month we'll get one of these shows out to you guys, because I don't know, I feel like the 80s is worth revisiting, and this is coming from somebody who personally has tried most of his life to forget the 80s, because the 80s for me was absolute shite, the worst part of my life ever. But I guess, probably a lot of people my age would have probably said the same thing. It's an age thing. But going back and looking at it from a more educated, mature perspective that encompasses more than one angle, looking back to the 80s is really fascinating to me. It's like I can pick apart why I was fascinated with some stuff now. Like that's part of the programming. They were using that on me and I could see how it was working. That kind of stuff. I feel like the 80s was like the sort of the tip of the spear of when it really started to ramp up with social programming and all that kind of stuff. So, like, Jules, anything else that you can think of from just 1980 that sticks out that we haven't covered yet?
While I've been here just sitting here yarning with Buzz and Joe and Ron and the lovely people in chat. Um, while you're spinning, I'm not hearing anything over here. So I have no idea what you were spinning, but we were yarn. I was just kind of
That
yarning a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We were talking of gum on how gum was big back in the day. I mean, they're freshen up.
yeah.
Freshen up was the gum that had the juicy center that you bit into, and you got this dual sensation. You got gum and then you got candy all in one. And then bubble yum, and I can tell you a story about bubble yum. Bubble
They
yum
had
was big in the
Gatorade
80s.
gum at one point, I
Gatorade
think.
gum, Bubblicious was in '80s, and Big League Chew was a gum that came about in the '80s. But my bubble gum story, and it's bubble yum used to have a doll that was manufactured for a short time. She was on skates, and you would pull her and then you would push her and she would skate on her own. And as she skated, she blew a bubble. I remember being like 6 or 7 and wanting one so bad. We were in the store. I was crying for one because this doll was so cool and I wanted it. And my mom was like, no. And I cried and cried. And this people in the store were actually going to buy it for me and give it to me. And my mom was like, no, she needs to learn a lesson. There are some things you cannot
Hey,
have.
you know what though?
Sometimes no means no.
Y- Yeah, you just hit on something. I think maybe the 80s might have been the last decade where parents were actually allowed to tell their children no and not be accused of abuse.
You might be right. I
Like
mean, I
in the
remember,
80s, in the 80s, if your son came up to you and said, "Daddy, I want to be a woman," you would have probably set that straight, like right then and there. Oh, don't be an idiot. Of course you don't want to be a woman. Come on.
but
Look at all
you
the
know,
cool stuff you get to do as a man. Like that just wouldn't happen in the 80s. And now
and
it's
we
you can't argue with your children. You can't even argue with them or it's abuse.
no, we briefly talked about this a couple of weeks ago on how in the early '80s there was just so much, and to the mid '80s there was so much androgyny. You had like Boy George.
Yeah.
The difference between it then and now, back then, I don't know if it's because we were younger or it's the way society viewed it, but it was not weaponized back then. It was just what it was. Now, when they brought it back, version 2.0, it's beyond that. It's more. It's
Well, I don't know. I could argue that the 1980s was when they started weaponizing it because that's when a lot of musicians started coming out of the closet. And
yeah,
so like
you could
a
on that.
lot of these macho like, mid 20s to mid 40s macho men that grew up in the, 50s and 60s are all of a sudden finding out that their favorite bands are gay. It didn't go over well. Like I'm sure that bands like Judas Priest and Queen and um, you know, I mean, I don't know if people didn't see Elton John coming, then I don't know what to tell you. But like, I'm sure there was some people that stopped listening to Elton John when they found out that he was gay, just for like, you know, religious beliefs or whatever. And I feel like in the 80s is when AIDS was a huge deal as well.
Yeah, it
So
was.
yeah, it's like something going on with the 80s. Like they just started ramping up stuff. And we're going to get to the bottom of it. Well, maybe not the bottom of it because the bottom always has a basement. So we're going to get as deep as we can go. That's for sure. Hey, Jules, why don't you tell everybody that maybe doesn't know who you are and where to find you? Why don't you do that now?
Sure.
So,
I mean,
yeah. And
if
say hi to everybody in your chat room that's not in the greenhouse.
yeah, I'm
They're
not in the
welcome here.
greenhouse. So, hello, everybody in the greenhouse. Next time, I'm going to be more prepared and I'll have more windows open. After all, this really was a test run to see what me and Polly can do. And we've had a few hiccups. and we're still navigating and we're still learning. But next time it's going to be even more stellar than it is today. And I have a feeling that the people in the greenhouse kind of might know who I am. I'm just Jules. I'm just a normal, average, boring, ordinary person who just likes music and hanging out with the right people. Um, I intermittently do shows on my YouTube channel called The Bitter and Sweet, and I don't regularly stream because I'm kind of one of those that when inspiration hits, inspiration really hits. And it's hitting right now because me and Polly are over here yawning on YouTube, and I've already got the gear spinning trying to figure out how can I incorporate your playlist on my channel so people can always come back and hear these awesome tunes, and any kind of comments or anything, it'll all be together. So hello everybody, my name's Jules, and I got nothing more to say about myself. I'm just me.
Okay,
But thank
well,
you, Polly, for hosting.
here's what I'll add to that, and I'm gonna say this multiple times on this show, and that's music is meant to be played, but it's definitely not a toy. And so, uh, as much as I can expose that in anything that we do on this show, the better, because it's like when you're talking about like how smells remind you of things. Like if you knew how to use that to your advantage, you could make people feel a certain way as soon as they walk into a room without, all they have to do is breathe. And so like it's a stuff like that, like that, those smells, those like aromatherapies or whatever you want to call them, those aren't toys either. Food, it's definitely not a toy. Um, Basically anything that like you interact with on a really intense level with any of your five senses, I don't think those are toys. They're meant to be experienced and played with, but they're not toys. And I think that the 80s is when they really started to, kind of experiment with the idea of them being toys.
I would agree with you, but I also think that in the mid to late 70s, we started to see technology emerge that would help with this because I remember as a child being young before cable really became cable. I mean, we had three channels. When the president came on, your nightly programming was just screwed. There were no infomercials at night. When the station signed off, you had the national anthem and then just blank line, the vertical lines on the screen.
Yeah, the
And,
pride flag. The pride
and,
flag went on the screen.
and then around 1980, 81, there were late night programming was starting, and that's when cable started to take off. I think one of the first cable paid subscription services was in the late 70s with HBO. So HBO was like the paid premium
Really?
service, and then you started getting, yeah, because cable didn't really start taking off until the early 80s because that's when MTV kind of came about, was in 80 81. So that's what why I'm kind of fond of the early music from the 80s, is because you had all these crossover hits. You had like the Oak Ridge Boys, um, Kenny Rogers, Juice Newton. You could turn on an FM radio and hear these crossover artists, and you could also turn on an AM station and hear some of the top 40 play.
Yeah, you just reminded me of like if you pay attention, because I was a huge fan of Led Zeppelin. I know they're not 80s, but they did have an 80s record or two, and you could literally hear the integration of technology into, because these guys came from like the roots of music, like rock and roll, like blues, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, all those kind of guys, right? But by the 80s, they had adopted, synthesizers and like just a different vibe altogether.
Yeah,
And
and speaking
unfortunately,
of
Bono. I wonder if John Bonham. I don't know.
You
Maybe
were
he
you
did.
mentioned
Maybe it was 1981 or something like that. Anyway,
yeah, you mentioned
and
Led
there's
Zeppelin.
also okay. There's also yeah, and there's also the concert. There's a huge concert that happened in the 80s. You remember it? Live Aid.
There were Live Aid, Farm Aid, USA for Africa. The metalheads had their own fundraiser. It was called Hearing Aid. That's where you had Dokken, Judas Priest. You had all these headbangers that got together, and that was their charity drive. It was called Hearing Aid.
I thought you said hearing aid.
Yeah, it was called Hearing Aid.
What? Yeah, I had to. Sorry.
But you mentioned Led Zeppelin. Fool in the Rain, I think, was 1980.
Yeah, I think In Through the Outdoor might have been at 1980. I should know this because I was like, they basically taught me how to play half my guitar. But yeah, and I did multiple school projects on them and everything. Anyways, you can definitely tell the difference between 80s Led Zeppelin and like Led Zeppelin 3, which was in the early 70s. So it's like you could tell they were just assimilating the technology, trying to use it. And actually, I think in the early 90s, it might have been in the late 80s, Jimmy Page ended up doing a record with David Coverdale from White Snake. And I think they only ever did one record, but there's a couple good tracks on that record. I should dig it up. Hopefully it falls into the 80s time frame so we can do something on that, because I'll bet you not many people remember that record. Page ended up doing a record with David Coverdale from White Snake.
Wow.
And I think they only ever did one record. There's a couple good tracks on that record. I should dig it up. Hopefully it falls into the 80s time frame. All right. Okay. So we're coming up on the end of the show. We got about 13 minutes left. So, Jules, is there any songs that you want to hear from 1980? Like, if you had to pick one song from 1980, what would it be?
There are a lot of. Again, I listened to the sounds of 1980 as a mile marker.
On the end of the show, we got about 13 minutes left. So, Jules, is there any songs?
Sorry, I had another window open. I was trying to get to the greenhouse, and as far as answering your question, songs about 1980, that was a mile marker year for me. So, and I was incredibly young, so the songs that come to my mind are songs that are loaded with cheese.
Yeah, just pick one. It's all good because it's from the 80s. At least it's from 1980. That's all. The only restriction from 1980.
All right.
Pick whatever song you want, and you don't have to pick it right away because I'm gonna play. I'm gonna play a song called Xanadu, which apparently is from 1980.
You just from 1980 Xanadu.
Did I steal it?
No. But you're in the ballpark. Olivia Newton-John was one of my first musical loves, to the point I was such an Olivia Newton-John fan. She was my first concert that I never saw. And in my adult years, I took a trip to Vegas to see her at her residency at the Flamingo. And I can't tell you how amazing it felt to have the stage as my armrest. But my favorite Olivia Newton-John song is "Tied Up," and it's not from 1980. It's the flute and the horns that do it for me. But since we're on Xanadu, the soundtrack, and I've talked about it a couple of weeks ago why I like it. The song that I would play off that soundtrack for you guys right now is it's the one that's Olivia Newton-John and the Tubes, because it's literally two songs meshed into one. That's the song that I would play.
But you didn't give me a name.
Because off the top of my head, Dancing, I believe is the name of the song.
Well, I'm gonna play Xanadu.
Or All Over the World from Electric Light Orchestra. That's another Xanadu song.
Is it? Okay. It doesn't have to be from Xanadu. It can be
No,
from anywhere in the 1980s.
that's 1980. If you walked in and time traveled, walked in the room 1980, I was more than likely listening to Olivia Newton-John or playing with Strawberry Shortcake or my Christy Brinkley Barbie doll. Yeah, play Dancing from the Tubes and Olivia Newton-John. It's two songs in one.
Okay.
You get a little bit of rock and you get a little bit of pop and Olivia Newton-John's voice with the Tubes, and I like it. And
What's
if
it
you
called?
guys like it, then Dancing.
That's by ABBA? No.
No, that's Dancing Queen. Technology is not my friend today. Every
The
time.
Tubes. Okay,
Yeah,
you said the
the
Tubes, right?
The Tubes and Olivia
All
Newton-John.
right. Okay, it's in there. All right. I'll start with that one.
And another one that I would play from 1980, Prince, I Want to Be Your Lover.
No, you only get one. you only get one. Sorry. It's because we're running out of time. You know what?
Well,
this
all
show's
right.
been really fun. I hope it worked out for everybody.
Yeah. So I'm gonna in Skype the total song, one song from 1980 that people probably know me will probably think,
Right.
yeah, that's her.
Cool. Okay. Well, you know what?
There you go. Check your Skype.
I'm gonna sign off, and I'm gonna play some "Dancing," the Tubes with Olivia Newton-John. Thank you, Jules, for coming on, and you'll be back, I promise. And go check out Jules' channel. And thanks to IBN. And yeah, IBN is the Independent Broadcast Network, and it always will be, because it's independent and we're broadcasting and we're building a network. If you feel like helping out the network, please do. There's many ways you can do that. We'll talk about that next week. Until then, happy Easter, everybody. I hope everybody has a great week.
I'm going to sign off here.
Thank you, Jules, for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I'm going to sign off here on YouTube so I can quickly jump to the greenhouse and hang out with you guys and say hello and mingle and everything. But thank you for coming and joining me on the Bittersweet. And this is just a sample of what we can do. Now we've got a starting point. The sky's the limit, Polly. So thank you for much fun. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. We will do this again very soon. Love you guys. Stay bright.